So thank you for joining us. I feel like we've been talking about you joining for a bit, so I'm glad the day is finally here. I'm excited to read this book or talk about this book. I just reread it and I'd forgotten how emotional it made me feel. It's rare for a horror book, I feel like, to like you can laugh and you can cry and you can be scared. And this book really has like all of those elements.
Mm.
Um, Before we get into that though, I do just want to do a quick intro. So we're pleased to have Philip Fracassi with us here today. We're going to talk about the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. You have written some of my favorite books, Boys in the Valley, Gothic, The Third Rule of Time Travel, your upcoming release, Serafina. But of course, we are here to talk about Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre.
Yeah.
And congratulations too. We were just talking about your book announcement, but that is huge, and I know we're all very excited about it. Can you give us a little bit of insight into it before we get started?
You know what it is? It's a big relief because I didn't I did not know if I was going to ever get another book deal. I was so terrified. Um earlier in I was going to say earlier this year, but I guess earlier in 2025. Um and so we were lucky to get into to make that deal with them, and I was lucky that that editor is a big fan of my work, and so we found something to do. But yeah, Blue Butterfly, much like as I tend to do, I bounce around in the genres pretty somewhat casually, I guess. I like to just write different sort of things. So the Blue Butterfly is actually a thriller. It's not going to be marketed as horror, as you saw if you saw the announcement today, they actually categorize it as a thriller, which is what it is, versus like Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, which we'll talk about, which I had told Tor Nightfire, I said it's really not horror, it's really more of a thriller. Um, but they wanted to market it as horror, which is their discretion. It's fine. But so yeah, so it's more of a thriller. It does have a speculative slant to it. There is like a sort of a fantastical time travel element versus Third Rule of Time Travel, which is a very science-based time travel. This is much more speculative. It's much more fantasy in that sense. And it's about a young fashion designer who comes across this box of um clothing and accessories that was sold to this vintage clothing shop that her friend owns, and it's all from this one actress who was an actress in the 50s and who infamously was murdered very young, and it was never solved. And just like the Black Dahlia, this murder was sort of known in Hollywood lore as sort of the Blue Butterfly murder. So anyway, so what happens is she through the when she touches certain when she comes in contact with certain items, she actually kind of like she gets thrown back in time, and she encompasses this actress's body, and she goes through a moment in her life when she was wearing this same article of clothing or this bracelet or this hairpin or whatever it was. And through the course of the novel, you realize that she's reliving these moments that are all dropping little hints as to what really happened back in the 50s. And then it's also brought into the present day, and there's some elements that enter the present day as well, which ends up putting our young heroine and her friends in a bit of danger. So that's kind of the basic
This
premise.
sounds
It's very
amazing.
dark. It's very, very dark because it's me. So it's dark. And it's very like has definitely has some horrific moments. But it's also like a straight up thriller with a little bit of a whodunit as well.
I I think one of the reasons that I love your writing so much is you are able to really bounce around from genre to genre like seamlessly. I also think that's just like a testament to how strong of a writer you are too. So
Well,
I'm
thank
very
you.
excited about this.
Yeah, I always tend to go dark, but yeah, I like but sometimes, like I'm writing Gothic 2 right now, Gothic the End. For those who don't know, I wrote a novel called Gothic, which is definitely horror, like old school horror. And so writing Gothic 2, is like I'm writing another horror novel, and then I'm writing um my next novel will probably be the is probably going to be called The Farm, and that's also a very straight down the middle horror novel. And then after that, I have a crime novel I might want to write. So yeah, I kind of write whatever I feel like writing, and I sort of let the publishers figure it out. Um, but yeah, it is fun to bounce around. I would like to write another science fiction novel at some point. Orbit really wants one from me. I just don't have an idea yet that I really believe in, and I also have other books that I want to write first. So, but we'll see. At some point, I would love to write another science fiction novel.
We'll read whatever you write,
Well,
so
thanks.
we're very excited for them. So I want to jump into Autumn Spring. So I guess one of the things that I really loved about this book is it feels like Autumn Springs itself feels like a character, but also we have a huge cast of characters too. And I feel like often with horror, you may have a big cast, but those cast members really aren't getting a lot of page time. With Autumn Springs, like each character really is fleshed out in its own way. I'm curious though, given how many characters are in this book, if you had a favorite to write or if there was one that was more challenging to write than others.
Well, obviously, I really enjoyed writing Rose. She was the she came, she entered entered the stage first in my head. And she was she was a wonderful character to write and a wonderful character to spend time with. And interestingly, I found it very easy to write from her perspective, even though it doesn't really, make sense given, but a lot of the factors of how different we are in real life. But yeah, I really loved Rose. I had a very clean affinity for her. It's interesting. A lot of times I have to find the angle, I guess might be the best way to put it. Like what is this character uh need to be for me to really be feel comfortable writing that character for. And I'll give you an example. I'm writing, like I said, I'm writing Gothic 2 right now, and the main character is a woman in her late 30s who is a YA writer, writes vampire, has a series of very popular vampire novels. And no, witch novels. Sorry, witch novels, not vampire. And I was kind of struggling a little bit. I was like, well, what about her is interesting? What about her would make her interesting to me? And then I was kind of thinking, oh, well, what if she was like this goth, as a kid, and she's had to sort of like turn off the goth because she has kids now and she's kind of a successful author, and she's just feeling like she has to be more normal and not, I'm saying by normal, like more like, mainstream or whatever, and professional and all that stuff. And but there's always that like underlying like kind of punk rocker in her. And I thought that was really fascinating. And so that kind of made her interesting to me. And I could say, oh, I can play with that. Like that kind of um that sort of push and pull of like her past and her present and wanting to be that girl that she was when she was a teenager, but also needing to be this responsible adult for her children. And so anyway, so that dynamic really made her fascinating to me. And it ended up becoming a much bigger part of the story than I had originally anticipated. And it's actually directly playing into the plot much more now, this element of her. So things like that are like with Rose, I think I wanted to, sometimes I kind of mold their characteristics a little bit so that they're interesting to me as a writer and that they're complex for the reader. So they're not just kind of one dimensional, and that they're kind interesting, and you also are kind of discovering things about them as you go along. So yeah, so that was why, with Rose, all of that, a lot of that came more naturally. Some of the elements of Rose, like her history, came as I was writing her. There's a part in the book where I think I was about a third of the way through the book, give or take. And I was like, Rose, why are you acting this way? Like, why are you responding that way? Like, why would you say that to him? Like, what's your problem? Like, what's your deal? And I didn't really know. And then it kind of came to me. I was like, oh, Rose comes from an abusive relationship. And that became really interesting to me. Her trust issues and her independence issues. And so all of a sudden she became this like full blown, really complex character. And I just fell deeper and deeper into her psyche. So that was kind of the thing that happened with her. The second part of your question, which one was my favorite character, right? And then what was the second part of your question, Amber?
Was there one that was more challenging to write than others?
Um, the detective was sort of challenging to write because I wasn't sure how to make him interesting. And I didn't want him just to be I don't know. I know I'm going to be too vanilla. And but I also didn't want him. There's so many colorful characters in the book. I also didn't want him necessarily to have that same flavor, if that makes sense. And I'm using vanilla and flavor in the same metaphor, but I wanted him to be um I wanted the reader to be interested in what he was thinking, but not necessarily distracted by him. So he was kind of a balance because and what I ended up doing with him, I've done this with other, um, in other books, like with my novel A Child Alone with Strangers. I had a FBI agent named Sally Salvador, and I kind of gave him a little bit of Sally's sort of like, kind of like they get excited about figuring something out. And the way I share the information with the reader is very much real time. So I want the reader to feel that same excitement that they're feeling. So that's kind of what I did with that character. He kind of became an avatar for like you as the reader, like going, oh wait, oh that's interesting. Oh that, so and then so he kind of became the that sort of plot device or that tool for me to kind of keep the reader engaged and excited about what was happening as far as like the solving of the crimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I really appreciate the way the investigative elements played out in this book because it doesn't feel like a procedural book. And so I definitely agree. And I think you nailed it with him. I am curious about Tatum though, because I feel like I really appreciated Rose's friendship with him, but
Mhm.
it feels like out of all the characters, he really has maybe, I mean, he does die, but it does feel like his death is almost the purest in some way. I mean,
I'm
he gets,
sorry, everybody, by the way. I know a lot of
yeah.
people were very upset with me about that.
But
Like,
but it does,
I
I mean,
trust me when I say I had no choice.
I appreciate that. I mean, but it does feel like you give him more resolution maybe than the other characters that pass away in this book. I mean, was that intentional on your part?
It was intentional, yeah, because I felt really bad about it. Um, I actually waffled a little bit on whether Tatum on Tatum's fate. But at the end of the day, I needed Rose to have that final defeat, and so that she could rise from the ashes again. And I needed to hurt her in a way that would knock her back, that would really give her that all is lost feeling. But that said, you guys have probably read, you guys have all read the book. You've all read the afterword. I'm sure most of you have. And Tatum, a lot of Tatum was drawn from my father, who, 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 um, who I had to care for, who had dementia, and and who passed away, and all that, and so I kind of incorporated a lot of the feelings that I had from dealing with that in my real life to sort of Tatum. And so there was a part of me as a writer where I was like, I kind of want to give him a happy ending, even though I'm, I'm doing this to him. I'm, drowning him in the creek. I did want and I wanted readers to be like, I think sometimes, I think I think there's being, I think there's levels of meanness with writing, and I think with specifically with horror, and I think you can be mean, and then I think you can be mean in a kind of like in an entertaining way. And then I think sometimes you can be mean in a way that's not really that fun or that's not entertaining or that ruins the experience. And so I try to find that balance. Um, and I think that was one of those moments where I was trying to find that balance where I wanted it was sort of my mea culpa to the readers. Like I know, but look, he's with Jack. It's fine. Like he's fine. And he's in a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think, I mean, I think there's an interesting part of this book where it seems like a lot of the characters, they've accepted that they're at the end stage of their life, that death
Yeah.
is eventually coming. But then there's also, understandably, this resistance of like, okay, I know it's coming, but I want it to be on my own terms. So when, the other residents start passing away, it does start invoking a fear, but it's a layered fear. I feel like it's the fear of dying, but also the fear of, is anyone going to believe my thoughts on this? Like, are they going to take away my independence? Because this sounds kind of crazy talking about. I mean, was
Right.
it difficult for you to balance kind of empathy towards an aging group, but also keep them realistic and also kind of weave in like the nuance of getting older is hard and there's layers to like their frustration and fears.
I've gotten so many, when I say so many, I mean, I probably, five or six, but for me, it's a lot. I don't get a lot of fan mail, but I've gotten so many people who have reached out, and I literally just was reading an email about half an hour right before I jumped on here, um, that someone sent me through my website, and they were just saying that, like, how surprised they were at how I sort of nailed the thought process of someone who is elderly and in that situation. They're like, as a young person, I'm so surprised that you were able to like identify so accurately. And the reason I can do that is because I have an old soul. No, um, it, it wasn't. It, I think, I think if I don't think I could have written this book when I was in my 30s. Um, I think I've gone through so much with end of life scenarios with my parents, with my wife's parents, with friends, parents, who are all now reaching, we're in that generation where, I'm in my 50s, so all my parents and my friends' parents are all in their 80s or whatever. And so I do think that I had some familiarity just by interacting with those kind of folks and listening to them and talking with them um and also going through a lot of what I mentioned going through with my own parents. But so, and I think also a lot of it just comes naturally from just being, just sort of like naturally empathetic. I think I can it's kind of easy for me to slip into different sh pairs of shoes and sort of see the world from that perspective. It's something that I've been gifted with or for whatever reason, but it allows me to write different characters. So I think with that perspective of like, you know, um, giving them that, like, there's that whole element I talk about it in the book, where it's like, well, yeah, there's a familiarity with death because, it's not, it is sort of walk in the hallways. It is, it might come by for a cup of coffee in the morning. And I think that, um, that's very realistic for people who are of that age. And I think it's very healthy for people who are of that age and to just kind of be like, yeah, like I don't know how much time I have left. I mean, I think that, and I'm only 50s, and so I think there's that element of like being aware of it, not being scared of it. But then, and this is what happens with Rose, is like, but wait a minute, but that doesn't mean, to your point, I'm going to allow somebody else to dictate those terms, you know, um, just because we have a comfort level with the idea of dying doesn't mean that we're going to allow somebody to come in and like kill our friends and paint, and hurt our friends, almost more to the point. And so yeah, that was a balance. And Rose's independence was a balance. Um, I wasn't sure how much pushback I was going to get uh regarding that. And I got very little. I was surprised at her sort of like, I think one or two people commented on like Rose has some inner dialogue where she kind of doesn't talks about not wanting to be a babysitter. She doesn't want to, she wants to have her life. And I got a couple of negative comments about that, her being kind of like hard person to like because of that. And I said, well, I don't think she's a hard person. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's just a person who wants to have her own life too. And I've known people like that. And I've had conversations with people about that exact thing. So, but at the same time, I'll give you guys one example. Like, I was at my wife's parents are very active. Her dad's he's in his 80s and he's in fencing club. Her mom just went to Spain on a hiking trip and she's in her late 70s. And but at the same time, they live in a retirement community. And like we were there over the holidays. This is the last holiday, so holidays, a year ago. And we're all just like sitting around chatting. And her mom said, "Oh, did you hear about the neighbor next door?" And her dad said, "Oh yeah, I heard she passed." And then her mom was like, "Yeah, do you know when that unit's going up for sale?" And it sounds very heartless, but they were just like, that's it just what happens. It happens. So it happens in that community. And so I wanted to get some of that into the book, which is like, yeah, it's very common and they're very comfortable with the idea of it. But at the same time, they want to do it, to your point, on their terms.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that that's another thing that you did really well is that they have pretty full lives. I mean, it is, you do
Right.
touch on, and I think this is like the kind of the sad reality most of the time, which is like their family members aren't visiting and they don't have all the time for them. But they are like they're having parties and they're dating and they're going to movie night. And so I mean, I really appreciate it how you didn't, I think it would have been easy to paint them as kind of like sad, lonely older people, but they're not. They're really
Eating
vibrant.
oatmeal
Yeah.
and right. Yeah, no, that's not really reality. And what
Yeah.
I painted is actually reality. And I've spent a lot of time, one of the things that one of the background things that I was able to do, because I used to work in film and TV, look as a location manager. So I worked on this TV show called Yellow Jackets, and we filmed in one of the sets that they filmed in was a retirement home here in Hollywood, a retirement community. And I was the location person responsible for that set, which means I spent like over a month every day at this retirement community. I hung out with the residents. I hung out with the administrators. I hung out with the nurses. I walked every inch of it. Where can crew go? What time do we have to do? Where we're going to put the cars? Where we're going to put the bathrooms? Whose room can we use? You interact a lot with people when you are in that job. So I learned a lot about, um, what a retirement community is really like just by my time spent there. And they did have movie nights, and they did have Scrabble nights, and they did have sewing circles and knitting circles. They do have all that stuff that is kind of cliche, but it actually is real. And but they also have like outings, and they go to, whatever. They go to festivals, or they go to farmers markets, or or they go out to, they have sushi night, whatever. They have normal lives too, and they're in clubs. And so, yeah, so for me, one of the things made a point about was I really want this to feel like a vibrant, very realistic, very vibrant community of able-bodied, able-minded people. But obviously, then there are people who are not well, or who have um uh you know have had problems with age-related things. And so that's part of it too. And so I wanted to kind of have that without making it um unnecessarily come off as like segregated, even though they were technically segregated. I wanted to kind of be like, it's all the same community, and it's just different people and have different needs. Um, and that, I think, was one of the things that was nice about Tatum, was I think in some ways he became that sort of like common ground between those two things. And even like Stan, good old Stan, he was kind of an opportunity for me to talk about the fear of going into like full-time care. And so I kind of used him to be able to kind of talk about some of those fears, and what it means to them emotionally and psychologically. So yeah, so that was all part and parcel.
I love Rose, and I do have a special place in my heart for Tatum. My grandfather had Alzheimer's, so I appreciated how you wrote him, but I have a really special place in my heart for the Baxter sisters.
Mhm.
I would love to see a prequel or a novel about them. They're
Oh, okay.
so fascinating. So no question there, just more of a comment of how much I love the Baxter sisters.
I'll tell you one interesting thing about the Baxter sisters that you guys might or might not find interesting. But when I first wrote the novel, one of the things that the UK, because I have a UK editor and a US editor, and my UK editor was like, we'd really love more Baxter sisters. And because like we feel like they'll go over real well in the UK. And so I did enhance, not a lot, but I definitely went through those chapters, and I kind of gave them a little more screen time, as it were, a little more page time. And but yeah, they were fun. And that was another thing that was a bit challenging, was not to make them cliche or two-dimensional, really to make, I liked the idea when you first meet them, um, or maybe not when you first meet them, they're like, they're kind of like around the cauldron, as it were. And but then next time you meet them, they're like in yoga pants coming back from, and that was very purposeful. They're just these nice old ladies. And even Rose gets a lesson in that, which, she's, when they go to the apartment, it's cozy and it's pleasant, but they also sleep in bunk beds, so it's a little weird. But and they're also like trying to raise a demon, so that's just odd. But so yeah, so they were quirky, is what they were, and but they were a lot of fun to write. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
liked them.
I really liked them.
And I'm
Any
sorry,
chance?
and I'm sorry again.
Oh, well, I I will forgive you.
Yeah,
Um,
they were doomed from the start,
they
unfortunately.
can, yeah. Will we ever get to go back to Autumn Springs?
So I originally had pitched the publisher on a sequel that I really wanted, was excited to write, and they declined. And so I don't know. I do have the point is I do have an idea that I would like to write, but it's tricky for me because probably won't be working with that publisher again. So I'm kind of like, well, do I want to do a sequel with a different publisher? That seems weird to me. I'm not even sure a different publisher would be interested. So, but I do have another story. But I mentioned this, before, I do have there is a movie being developed for the story for the book, and they're actually writing the screenplay. There's a director. It's funded. It's actually really happening. Hopefully, they're going to begin production before the end of the year. But my point is, I think maybe I could use that idea for like if the movie does well, maybe I could offer it, as a sequel for the movie, or maybe write it as a novella, possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's called The Autumn Springs Offspring,
Oh,
and the uh the idea, the basic idea, because I don't want to give away too much, but the basic idea is that the grandchildren of the residents of Autumn Springs begin disappearing. And at first, it seems like a coincidence, but then they realize it's a pattern. So,
yeah, I will
and
take that.
Rose has a grandchild, for those who remember little Roy. So,
I will take that in whatever form you will give it to me.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, I think it would be a lot of fun. I have some pretty scary thoughts in my head about it, but I don't know. Does that, yeah, again, unfortunately it takes two to tango. Um, and the Nightfire didn't want it. So, we'll see.
I'm going to open it up to questions from our members if that's okay with our last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away.
Can I? Philip, when I read this, my father he passed away about 7 years ago now. Actually, it'll be 8 this year. He had Alzheimer's, and
Mm.
it was very hard at the end. But my mom is also suffering from dementia, so I just put her in
Oh,
home
sorry.
last year. So this book, like, I was crying like 90% of this book, but the part that got me the most was when they were all trying to call their families to get them
Yeah.
out there. And it just, I was running, I was listening to it running one day, and I had to like stop, and I was just like crying because it was just, it was so sad. And it was like, it's the kind of thing. And like, you and I are the same age. So it's like, I know I'm always thinking about like, is anyone ever going to take care of me, or is it going to be like me? And then I felt like I was like, oh my God, I threw my mom into this home, and because I couldn't take care of her anymore because I took care of her for the last 6 years, and it just got too hard. But
Yeah.
it's like the guilt, and
I did like 2 months and I was toast. So I can't even imagine 6 years, but yeah, go ahead.
no, well, but it was so refreshing reading that, like, because it was a great story because you're amazing, your characters are always incredible, but I'm like, I just loved how you, like, just the that part of that book really like hit me hard, and then I read your afterward and I was like, yep, yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting chapter, because it was one of the things that I had originally, when I first thought of the idea, I had sort of like three or four scenes in my head. And that's pretty typical with me. I'll be like, oh, okay, I have, like if scenes start popping up in my head, that's a good thing. It means, okay, I know this thing has legs. And one of the scenes that popped into my head very early on, besides the dentures, which I give full credit to my wife for, that was her idea. But I said, what could I do with dentures? And she was like, well, maybe you could like lace them with cyanide or something. And but but when I first thought of that scene, and this is when I hadn't really fully fleshed out the novel or the characters or anything, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if there was a scene where they were all trying to like get out, but they couldn't because their kids were like, "Oh, sorry, we're going to Disneyland next weekend, or it's a bad time. The kids have spring break." And I was, but then when I was got more into the book, and the book kind of got tonally more intense and dark and deep and emotional, all of a sudden that became like this heartbreaking chapter, right? This heartbreaking moment, and it was very hard to write. It ended up being very, very hard to write. Much more so than even I would say that and Tatum were probably Tatum's demise were probably the two hardest uh, for me to write. And but yeah, but another thing about that that's interesting from a purely from a artistic perspective is that one of the things I was thinking about when I was writing the first part of the book was how am I going to isolate all of these residents? Why can't they just get in their cars and leave? And I was like, well, I'll deal with that when I get there. But I had like made a note to myself, like, why aren't they leaving? I think was the note I wrote down. And then when I got more into it, I realized I'm like, oh, they can't leave because they have nowhere to go. And that's horrible. Um, and that's when that scene kind of in that concept that kind of like became one thing where I was like, okay, so I'm going to write this scene now where it's going to be me telling the reader, this is why they're stuck here with this killer because they have nowhere to go. And a lot of them are sort of, in a way, they're sort of trapped. And so I thought that was, yeah, that was a heartbreaker. I felt, but again, a necessary plot
Mm-hmm.
element because I did have to keep them there. Sadly, it ended up working out.
Well, it was amazing. Like, but I just, whew, yeah, that killed me. It killed me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that. So I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll go now. So I love this book. I think everybody, as they age, starts to think about, so what will this look like for me in 30 years, 20 years, especially as someone who's not having children, like what's this going to look like for me when I enter these times of my life? And so I just thought this was really beautifully done because I feel like, especially for the elder community, we
Mhm.
often sort of sweep them under the rug, or we think, oh, like we put them in these homes, we forget about them, and it's so sad. But I've noticed actually recently, like kind of a trend of folks um, focusing on uh, elderly final girls, or the like making books about these like super strong and empowered elderly folks, and I think it's so beautiful. And so I really appreciate that you did that here. So I love a good old lady final girl, so I thought that was beautiful. But the ending was spot on. I felt for a little bit. I mean, of course, you always go through these phases of, oh, it's this guy, oh, it's this guy. I think a lot of us are talking in the chat. We thought it was Tatum for a while, or we thought it was so and so. There was a period of time where I was like, there's just so much crazy stuff happening, right? Like, is Rose suffering from dementia? Is this all just like a dementia, not fever dream, but just an experience that she's having where this is just crazy and she can't figure out what's going on. And so I got like super concerned for a while. But I'm glad because at the ending you really pulled this together. And so I guess my biggest question is why why did Miller survive? Was that important for Rose to have that surviving character? Did that help with her? You talked about earlier how as she had this inner dialogue, and oh, you realize now she's had this horrible relationship, and so was that character Miller and his ending crucial?
Um, I feel like it was crucial because I needed Rose to, I shouldn't say needed, I wanted Rose to win. And if Miller died, I think Rose would have lost. And I didn't want Rose to lose. I wanted her to go through the ringer. um, but I wanted her to win. But I'll be honest with you, I did not know that Miller was going to live until like I was writing that last chapter. I wasn't sure. I was on the fence, much like with Tatum. I was on the fence, but I was literally on the fence to the point where, in my mind, that wasn't the last chapter of the book. I had planned another chapter for after that hospital scene. Um, and and I wrote that letter that Miller wrote, and I had Rose in that hospital room, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna, I think she needs Miller to live, and I think because also really brought her character full arc, her arc, because the whole novel is Rose's sort of trying to figure out what independence means, or try to figure out, will I ever be able to trust anyone again? And so I think she needed to have that moment at the end where she was like, okay, I've my winter heart has melted, and I'm opening myself up to trusting again. And that's kind of, so I needed this, so for her to come full circle, or for her arc to really finish correctly, I needed to land her with Miller and a future, because otherwise I think a lot of what happened to her would have felt empty. Would have felt like just busy work, uh so yeah, but I wasn't 100% sure. As a matter of fact, I was almost like, I had this sort of idea where I was like, maybe Miller was sort of involved, or maybe I should sort of hint. I had this idea that, as I mentioned earlier in the book, that he had this daughter, this mysterious daughter, and this mysterious sort of granddaughter. And I was like, I wouldn't put it, I could see a world where like Mindy is related to Miller. And then ultimately became, I just didn't want to get into, I didn't want ultimately for me, I think when I got to that point, when I wrote that last line, I just said that's the end of the book. And I think for me, it was about, because this isn't about that. This isn't about like a pulling the rug out. This isn't about a aha, a gotcha, or a ooh. For me, it was like, look, this is Rose's story. Um, and Rose's story just ended. And that's the end of the book. And so that's kind of, I think, why I ultimately ended up writing it that way. It was, I really wanted Rose's story to be the point and the focus. And so that was why it was important for me that he lived and that they have a future. And I like the idea at a totally commercial uh level. I really love the idea of like having Rose and Miller mysteries. Um, but but I don't think I'm gonna have that opportunity now. But yeah, that's why I think I needed Rose to. I think it would have. I guess the best way to put it is, like I said, I think it would have felt too empty. All that she'd gone through would have felt too empty if she didn't, wasn't able to finish her journey, her emotional journey. So yeah, so Miller lives.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I also liked the idea of you putting into our heads like, okay, so is he related to this woman who's doing all these atrocious things? Like, does he know that he's related? I think that was important too, just to show her like non-trusting nature. And now she has no excuse, right? He survived all of this. She left him. She's got no excuse but to, give him a shot now.
Yeah, and that
Um,
was that scene, where because one of the original, like I had mentioned earlier on, I said it, I said I always have three or four things that pop in my head, and I had this idea of like, oh, I love the idea of like one of the victims writing like a message on their arm that looks like BMM, um and they're a filmmaker, and I had this, that it all went from there. Um but the scene that was really tricky for me was the scene where she confronts him with her own um mistrust of him, and that fact that she had that moment of like thinking he might be involved, and his being so offended by that he like basically walks away. It really hurts him. And that was the trickiest scene, because for me, the reason it was tricky was because I said, this scene is not really tonally in line with the thriller. It's not really the kind of scene you would normally see in a book like this, but it was important to me to write it. So it was almost like, I don't know. But it was it was important for me to have it there. But I knew when I was writing it that it was a bit of an outlier scene from kind of the pacing of the book. But I was hoping that readers would forgive me for it, and because I really wanted to have that moment between them. but that was a very, in my mind as a writer, that was a very much a, not in line with a typical what you would read in a normal in a thriller. Um, because sometimes you get a lot, and you've seen, you guys are probably, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of readers have commented on the length and it's too long and it's too much, and it would be perfect if it was 100 pages shorter and all that stuff. But for me, it's like, I really like to take care. I really like to explore these characters. I like to explore the personality dynamics. And maybe it's not that interesting to someone who's just looking for like a next kill, next kill, next kill. But for me, it's important because I want the book to feel very full, and I want the world that I'm building to feel very full, and the characters to feel very alive and very real. So um, sometimes I take those moments, even though they're not necessarily going to do me any favors with certain readers. But that was one of those moments where I was like, I want it. I think my editor even mentioned cutting it, and I said, nah, I want it. So
Yeah, I think that was an important one. I think that was something that now that you say it and kind of put those together, I don't think it was out of line at all. I think it helps to make this character and these whole characters, whole book feel different. It did feel more full. It felt more not emotional, but it felt more like you feel invested in this book versus your typical like slasher, slasher, slasher. Next. These are like
yeah,
these are people being slashed that and they have these lives and these relationships. I think that was very important.
yeah. Sometimes I wonder if reviewers get annoyed because they're like, no, I just want to read the book so that I can write the reviews so I can move on to the next book and write the reviews so I can move on to the next book and write the versus like a reader experience, which is like, no, I just want to like lose myself in this world for a while. So sometimes I take a grain of salt with certain reviews. And in that sense, I know that they're a professional reviewer and they probably read 200 books a year and they're just kind of like trying to keep it moving. So I think sometimes I think that this experience is different than like maybe like just like or someone who's just reading the book for pleasure or whatever. Um, but yeah, but so Miller was interesting, and that dynamic between them was something that I really enjoyed writing about. His kind of chasing her, and then her kind of rejection, and him kind of taking it in stride, and then her jealousy a little bit, right? And and uh and then her hurting his feelings to the point where she realized I want this man in my life. And so yeah, that all played into getting to that final moment.
I have a question really quick. So, because you mentioned Mindy, but I
The
was,
Mindy of it all.
yeah, the Mindy of it all. I mean, I think one of the reasons I really appreciated Rose is because she is sort of not what you're expecting from like an older female character. I mean, she does have the monologue about like, I don't want to be a babysitter and she wants to be
Yeah.
independent. I was also kind of surprised, and this is probably my own bias as a reader, just find the killer was a female. And so I'm just curious if that was always the plan or if that even, crossed her head. Because I feel like in slashers, typically we're not dealing with a female killer. We're dealing with like a male killer or someone that's supernatural.
Yeah. I didn't know who the killer was going to be until probably halfway through the book. I had some suspects. So this is I take a step back. This is the first book I've ever written that I did not fully outline. And it's probably the worst book I could possibly have not outlined, because when you're writing a mystery thriller with like all these characters and all these moving pieces and all these story threads that need to come together at the end, an outline is very helpful. But I had kind of a mental block outlining this book and I was on a deadline, so I just had to start writing it. And so I didn't really, a lot of it was surprising to me as I went along. But yeah, but Mindy was one of the suspects. The administrator was a suspect. Miller was a suspect. No, for those who are asking, Tatum was never a suspect. Although I did get that from a couple of folks. He really was just a nice guy with dementia. But and at one point I was thinking maybe there's two killers, but like go scream, the scream of it all. Um, and then I was thinking, well, maybe there's multi-generational killers, which I thought that's the idea that probably stuck with me the most, which is probably why Miller was kind of always this maybe a little suspect in my head. But ultimately, um, I landed on Mindy uh for two, 'cause there were a couple things with Mindy. One was um I didn't want her to have motive. And even though I knew that was going to kind of burn me a little bit with some readers, maybe some of you guys, which is totally fine. I was kind of like, I feel like it would be so easy for me to be like, okay, here's a one-page explanation of why Minnie's doing this. Believe me, it would be easy for me. I could write it in 5 minutes. Um, and and I was like, no, I really don't want her to have like a motive. That's kind of me. To me, that was like sort of like scarier and creepier, was that she's just like a serial killer.
Yeah.
Um, and she's done this before, right? So she's been doing it for a while and moving from place to place and basically preying on the helpless and innocent. And so for her, she's just like this, evil person. And so she's kind of this, but but no, I don't know. I don't really know why I landed on I don't think I was really thinking about gender. I would think I was just thinking that I liked the idea of it being this sort of spunky nurse who you kind of actually like, but like who seems like a kind of character that you would sort of like connect with a little bit, who seems sort of like um has a kind of a good energy, but then ends up being completely batshit crazy. Um, so that was, and then also I needed someone with access. And my cat is rolling around on the floor
Uh,
next to me, showing her
okay.
tummy and meowing.
It's
Don't worry,
adorable.
she's been fed, so I'm not sure what this bullshit is. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of, I think so. That's why it ended up being Mindy. Mindy was always the number one contender. But yeah, it wasn't really for any other reason than I think I was just thinking that I wanted it to, like I said, it had to be someone with access. I didn't want it to, I think the doctor at one point was lingering, was a possibility that the doctor you meet with Rose meets. Um, and so yeah, but that was it. But I definitely didn't want there to be a motive, and I liked the idea of it being this young woman who kind of like has been doing it for a while, and there's even a couple lines in the book, or I think there's a couple Easter eggs where I reference Annie Wilkes.
Mhm.
Um, I think I reference I think there's a cockadoodie in there, if I'm not mistaken, at some point.
Yeah.
And I think there's a Wilkes in there too. I'm not sure. I can't remember 100%, but at one point there was definitely a Wilkes. But anyway, so yeah, so there are some clues that it's a woman. And yeah, and I see to Mackenzie's point, yeah, and having somebody in plain sight was big. And also that's that balance too, right? Like you don't want it to be it has to be a character that you sort of like remember. So when Rose says, "Oh, hello, Nurse Jarvis," you're like, "Oh, it's that nurse, it's Mindy." But not so much, like who? Like who is it? Like who
Yeah.
is it? And you're going flipping back pages to find out who she's talking about. So hopefully that worked, but you didn't also want it to be like, it would have been kind of fun if it had been the administrator, like that would have been kind of cool. But yeah, but no, it was Mindy. So yeah, that was really the logic behind it. And I just liked, and I also liked, like I liked their back and forth when I was writing the final scene when she ties her to the train tracks and all that. I liked I liked when Mindy revealed herself and the way they interacted. Mindy being sort of like this almost like sarcastic, almost snotty, you know, um, uh, very dark, evil person, and then Rose being sort of like this voice of reason. And so like yeah, so for all those reasons, that's where we ended up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did appreciate those ending scenes. I thought they were really fun though, like kind of the dialogue between Mindy and Rose. Especially when she's like, "I'm going to give you this head start." So, and Rose is
Yeah,
like,
which
"Are
I
you
thought was
really?"
Yeah, to me, I don't know what you guys think, but to me, that was like one of the scarier parts of the book. When I was writing
Yeah.
it, I was like, there's something very terrifying about this woman saying like, go ahead and run, because I know I can catch you and I know you have no shot. And, and so that was kind of like for me, the idea of Rose it was the one time in the book where I kind of played on Rose being elderly, right? Like she could, how fast is she really going to be able to run away from this young girl? Um, so yeah, that was kind of, and that was me sort of, I guess, being like, really trying to get the reader, trying to get you guys to really feel like, oh shit, how is she going to get out of this? Because she can't outrun her. Is Mindy going to trip and fall on her knife? Like, what's going to happen? And of course, then I tied in the sisters and everything that they were doing, and the demonic element, because because we can talk about the mountain lion, because I don't know how everyone felt about the mountain lion, but
That,
Yeah, I mean, so
for the
is
record, it was the yes,
okay.
it was
Yeah.
it was the demon lord in cougar form, as it were. I Yeah, which is the whole point, which is why that's the whole reason the sisters even exist in the story, because they end up saving the day. And that's why they're with Rose at the end in that kind of spirit form and all that stuff. And yeah, and that was I think the funnest part of the book to write, was that whole sequence, because I really loved Rose being kind of like hallucinating, and how what was real, what's not real, and the fact that she was seeing the sisters, and the fact that she was seeing her, this sort of like monstrous version of her ex-husband, and the train having sort of like these, human features, and so a lot of that was really fun for me to
right.
write. But yeah, then Horus was the actual. It was, Horus in mountain lion form that killed the killed Mindy and let Rose escape. So the sisters did good, or maybe it was just a mountain lion.
Uh, well, I mean, so if it is a demon, do they still owe him a soul then? Do you
Well,
think?
he got the souls.
Okay, okay, that's
He
fair.
got all three.
He got all three.
Yeah,
Cool.
he only needed one, and he got all three because they all burned alive.
Well, I like the idea of them, I guess, still being together, even if it's not
That's
an
just I
ideal.
mean, I'm all about the happy ending. Just don't read Boys in the Valley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that book really made me cry a lot.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, I liked the sisters really came on strong at the end, and I loved them playing that role of helping Rose, and then Rose having to also fight like her own demons, quite literally, with the husband, and physically grabbing her arm and holding her to the train tracks and stuff like that. So all that was really fun. I wanted to have It was important to me to have a big, um, splashy, high energy, fun, crazy ending, because I feel like I'd put the reader through a lot. And I just
Right.
wanted now to have like, let's have some fun on these last like 50 pages. Let's go for it. So that was hopefully how it played out for everyone.
Yeah, it definitely did. It was a lot of fun.
With anyone else want to ask?
Maybe. I have to speak up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm very bad at face to face, so I'm
Hi,
referring to my
Abby.
own hi. I'm referring to my own review of the book because when I'm like in this capacity, my brain is like empty. So I touched on the fact that there is also a horror touched on in the book of living long enough to be discarded by society. So not I and I'm not saying that you're close to that age at all, so don't get me wrong, but when you write stuff like this, because I think these are real fears for everybody. Like I freak out sometimes because I'm like, what if I could step out tomorrow and croak? I don't know.
Get hit by a
So
bus,
it's
sure.
really yeah, I was gonna say that, but I'm like, please no. No, no, thank you.
Right.
um so when you
Get
write stuff like
disappeared by
this,
ice. Who
just
knows?
don't even say that. Oh my goodness. But yes, sincerely, like it's just the times right now are just ghetto as hell outside. So anyway, um is this writing stuff like this cathartic for you when you're going through something, or I feel like I'm not sure how the timelines match up, but I know you had to go through stuff with your parents. So writing things like this, does that ever feel cathartic for you, or are you just, writing a story?
This particular book was very cathartic in that sense. Yeah. I did get to explore a lot of those things that I'd gone through, and a lot of the emotions and the psychological sort of like, uh, I don't want to say damage, but but, a lot of the psychological,
Uh-huh.
scars that I was, wounds that I was dealing with for a long time because I lost both my parents, for those who don't know, like in about a 6 month period. And as I was writing this book. So yeah, so it was very cathartic for me because I did get to explore a lot of stuff. And I also felt like I got to sort of um share some of the stuff that I had been thinking about or dealing with. And so that was, yeah. And that's why I mentioned the afterward. It was very cathartic for me. I hope it was cathartic for others who like Peg, who maybe are going through similar things. But it's certainly not always the case. I would say this was an exception versus the rule. Most of the time I'm just writing to entertain you guys, and I'm trying to tell the best, scariest, funnest, craziest story I can. But yeah, but that was one in particular where this one in particular was more like pulled more from my real life than probably um any of my other books
Yeah.
that I can think of. I don't think I think the only one that even comes close, and this is probably surprise some people, would be Gothic, because Gothic in a lot of ways was me writing about um uh how hard it is to be a writer and a
Yeah.
lot of the struggles that I had early on as a writer, like for the first 5, 6, 7 years I was writing, I was on the edge of stopping, of quitting, because there was just so much negativity and all this stuff. And it was so hard to keep going, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of that went into like that book, a lot of that kind of frustration and probably for, pent up anger and all that other stuff kind of went into Tyson's character. But yeah,
Tyson's probably my favorite character of all time.
yeah. And a
I don't
lot
know
of
what that says about
he's
me,
pretty
but I love him.
snarky, which is probably another element of what I was going through. Yeah,
I'll
I
never
got
get
this.
over when he's like climbing the stairs and he starts acting like a dog. That like lives rent free
Yeah.
in my head. Like,
Yeah,
I love that
yeah,
scene.
he
Yeah.
crawls out of the bedroom. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just writing a scene today with that Tyson was part of for the new Gothic. But anyway, yeah, so yeah, but I would say that this book in particular was definitely had that um cathartic element to it, but and I think tonally it affected the book probably. I don't think I had originally, I originally pitched this book to as like a dark comedy. Um, and over the course of, writing it, and developing the characters and kind of getting into it more, I realized, oh no, this is going to be much heavier than that. And so yeah, so I think it also changed a lot of the tone of the book as well. I did see somebody asked why I couldn't outline the book. I don't know where that comment is now, but I think I saw it go by. The outline, I tried really hard to outline this book, and it was just one of those things where it was a weird block. Um, I just, it's the first time it's ever happened to me, and I think I've tried to analyze it, and I've talked to people about it. And the only thing I can think of is that sounds sort of like, kind of like, oh, maybe that could be it. Is that I think so much of the book is reactionary, the characters reacting to situations and scenarios, that I think I didn't really know. The plot was almost secondary to the characters and the characters responding to different things that were happening. So I think that's part of it why I couldn't see the story, the beats clearly, because I was thinking so much about the characters were so real to me that I kind of just wanted to kind of let them go and sort of see what would happen. And that's kind of, I think, this book was very organic. It was written very organically, much more so than anything I've ever written before. Like Child Alone with Strangers, which is 600 pages, that outline is like detailed to every single chapter, has like notes and bullet point. Like everything was outlined before I wrote it. Similar to Boys in the Valley. This one was very much kind of, I just wrote it organically. So it was interesting
Do you
in
think
that
that
sense.
you'll continue to do that? Do you think you like that process enough to like want to continue to explore that
Oh,
more?
I hated it so much. I did not like it. It was so stressful. And but I will say this, I learned a lot. I learned more writing this book than I've learned from writing any book other than maybe my first big novel, Child Alone Strangers, because um I did learn a lot about letting things sort of evolve and sort of following along versus necessarily having everything pre-planned. Um but it's difficult, especially like I said, with a mystery thriller because like the Blue Butterfly, for example, which we talked about at the very beginning, like that's a mystery thriller that has multiple timelines, and that outline was like crazy because I had to keep it all straight. There's a lot to keep straight. Same with third rule of time travel. That there's like spreadsheets and shit for third rule of time travel, and so sometimes you're doing the book a disservice by not having it thought through, especially when it's a complex book with a lot of characters and a lot of moving pieces and red herrings, and you're seeding different things to get the reader to like, you know, think one way when you're, look left while I'm going right. Um, but what I ended up doing was I ended up doing a pretty successive rewrite of this book once I had it finished. And I was like, okay, now that I know where I'm going, I can go back and connect all the dots and make sure that nothing is too loose. But you never know. I mean, never say never. Gothic too, honestly, I'm writing right now, it's very loosely outlined. It's for me, it's very loose. Like it's bullet, like it's I have like maybe a dozen bullet points of like here the things that happen, which for me is not a lot. So maybe I'm evolving a little bit as a writer where I'm getting more comfortable or more confident where I can write maybe without necessarily having everything planned to the minutia. I kind of like the idea of just sort of like, let's see where this character goes. But I also don't want to do a disservice of the book by not knowing what happens next. I don't want to just meander and make the reader be like, come on, dude, let's go pull it together. Let's move on. So yeah, so it's you never yeah, so I don't know. I think each book is unique and each story is unique. So yeah, I'll just have to see how it plays out. I know that the farm, which I mentioned earlier, which is probably my next big horror novel, that will be extensively outlined. I've already got so much of that story in my head, every kind of like scene. But after that, who knows? So, but I did learn a lot. It was stressful. It was just stressful because I was so afraid I was going to paint myself into a corner.
I really appreciate you joining us. I think we're at the top of our hour, but it was great speaking with you about this book. I hope we can have you back on, maybe for Serafina,
Yeah.
and then for Blue Butterfly.
Uh, yeah, that'd be great. That sounds nice, guys. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you guys for reading the book. And I'm glad you hopefully all enjoyed it and
Loved,
very
loved
much
it.
appreciate it. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And give it to your mom or dad or grandma or grandpa because I've had a lot of folks reach out to me and say that they've done buddy reads with their parents and or grandparents even, and it's been really fun for them to do that. So yeah, I'm glad that people are connecting with Rose and with the story. So thank you, and thank you for having me, Amber. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. No, and I love that idea of that buddy rate too. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's been fun to get those emails. So
That's really cool.
yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank
Thank
you
you
so
all.
much.
Thank you.
Have a
Have a good
great
night,
week.
everyone.
All right, talk soon.
Bye.
Yes.